Started. Again, welcome. My name is Andrew Weller. I'm the Dean of Enrollment and Strategic Marketing here at St. Stephen's St. Agnes School. With me on the webinar this evening is also Scott McLeod, who's the Admissions Operation Manager. You may not have met Scott, but if you've been to any of our webinars or events, Scott was the man behind all the magic who made everything happen. Scott keeps all the trains running on time here in the admission office, and he's going to be facilitating our Q&A session as we get a little further into this evening's webinar. A little bit on kind of what we're up to this evening. We're going to do another one of these in March. So if you're unfamiliar with how it works here in Washington, D.C., the first Friday in March, families find out where they got their offers of admission. And then the third Friday in March is when you as families make decisions. So sometime in that 2-week time frame, we're going to do a similar webinar that we're doing this evening, because then we'll know next year's tuition and things like that. And we'll be able to have more details for you. We have 2 opportunities this evening for some Q&A, and you should have a little Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom, and we invite you to put your questions in there. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. If we do not get to your question, we will get back to you via email and answer your question that way in the next day or 2. So if you have a very specific question that might be unique to your family or your situation, or a question you don't want to kind of ask in front of the whole group, feel free to put that in there and we will get back to you later on that. Just make sure that you've named yourself. So you know at this point, right, this is probably your 103rd Zoom of the week. You can name yourself. Just go ahead and make sure that you've named yourself, because if you ask a question without naming yourself, then we won't be able to get back to you. But we will try to get to all the questions we can this evening. So tonight, as you know from the invitation, is a 2-part webinar, if you will. This is the agenda for the first part, which is going to take us about 15 minutes or so. And we're going to be talking about school finances, tuition, expenses, deposits, things for you to be thinking about around finances. And then we're going to take a pause at that point, and we're going to do some Q&A and answer any questions on those topics. The second part of the evening, which we estimate will start around 7:20 or so, we're going to do deep dive into our financial assistance program here at St. Stephen's St. Agnes. We have $5.7 million in financial assistance that we award each year. And the second part of the evening is going to really dive into that. And you're going to learn about our philosophy, how you apply for financial assistance funds, how does that work in your first year as you join us as a Saint, and then how does that work in subsequent years. And then we'll open it up to a Q&A again at the end of that. So if you're still with us through the financial assistance part, we're going to do another Q&A. Should I stay or should I go? Who likes a good Clash reference for a musical Thursday night? If you're thinking about whether or not you should stay or go for the second half, I encourage you to stay just to find out about the program. It may not be something that impacts you immediately. It may be something that you want to be thinking about if you have a second or third child who joins us. Maybe in the future you'd be applying for financial assistance. Maybe you're a family that's thinking, oh, I don't know if we're going to qualify. Why should we bother? We always encourage people to apply. It's a good reality check for you. And you may not apply this year, or excuse me, you may not qualify this year, but you may qualify in the future. And by applying for financial assistance this year, you'll see how far off you are from being able to qualify in the future. So feel free to drop off after the first half of the evening if you want to, but certainly warmly invite you to stay on and learn more about the financial assistance program so you can see if that makes sense for your family going forward. So let's dive into the finance part. So here's the basic information on this school year. As I said, we don't know next year's tuition yet, but you'll know that before we ask you to sign a contract. The tuition covers most everything that we offer here at St. Stephen's St. Agnes. Now, there are some additional fees. Some of them are mandatory. Most of them are optional. The mandatory ones are pretty small, $60 here, $80 there, might happen a couple times a year. If you want to know if that's part of your decision making, you can let us know. If you just ask us the question, we can tell you, hey, on average, a 4th grade family should expect. On average, a 9th grade family should expect. The good news about expenses is the 3 big ones, they're all under your control. So the 3 biggest expenses a family might incur in one year is busing, food service or lunch, if you will, and extended day or aftercare for our youngest saints down in the lower school. And those things are all optional. So those big expenses are all ones that you can choose for yourself if you want to. Then there's mandatory fees that often have some options to it. So let's take, for example, in our middle school, we do a mini program that runs for an entire week, and that happens each year in March. Some of those mini programs are local here in the community, and your saint will come home to you every night for dinner and to sleep in their own bed. And some of those involve travel, sometimes outside the country. As you can imagine, the local ones cost less and the ones outside the country cost more. So you have quite a bit of control over those additional expenses that might crop up during the year. But as you can see here, this is the tuition we have for the current year. Typically, tuition goes up somewhere around 3.25%. So you can kind of estimate for yourself what that's going to look like next year. And you can find the tuition on the webpage on the admissions section of the webpage. So let's move into deposits and payment plans. So we've got a number of options. The first is to prepay. If you would like to give us your entire year's tuition in advance, we will be very happy to take that from you. That is due on July 1st, next summer. And for prepaying the entire year, we will give you a credit of $250 against all your expenses and other things like that. So you'll get a little bit of a discount if you prepay everything by July 1st. We then offer 4 other payment plans. You can see them here: 2 months, 4 months, 10 months, 12 months. Important for you to know, our payment plans, we do not charge interest. There are no fees. It doesn't cost more to do a payment plan. So whether you do the 2-month plan or the 12-month plan, at the end of the year, it's not going to cost you any more money than it would otherwise. So feel free to take advantage of the payment plans if you'd like, and not be worrying that there's some other costs that's involved in the payment plans. But let's talk about our other payment plan, our double secret payment plan, we sometimes call it. And that's the plan that you design for yourself. That's the plan that you say to us, hey, here's my cash flow situation. Here's our financial picture. And this is what makes best sense for us. And this is what we would like to propose. And I can tell you that we will almost always take that. I can't promise it you because I'm not the decision maker, but I will tell you that we will almost always say yes to that. Many reasons, or one of the many reasons that people choose St. Stephen St. Agnes is because of our character, our culture, our values, who we are as an Episcopal school. And one of the ways that manifests itself is wanting to work in close partnership with our parents and to trust our parents. Our default position is partnership and trust of our parents. And we stick to that until a parent gives us a reason to not do so. So if you give us a payment plan that you think that makes sense to you, we are most likely going to accept it because we trust you and we want to be a partner with you. So let's think about that. What does that look like, for example? I'll give you 2 of my favorite examples. Imagine you are a family and you own a florist. There are no flower holidays in the fall, right? And then suddenly, boom, Valentine's Day, boom, Easter, boom, Mother's Day. Suddenly florists are making all their money in the spring. So if you came to us and said, hey, I'd like to be able to pay a little bit each month in the fall, but then I want to pay a lot more in the spring because that's when I make all my money, we're going to be fine with that. Another example of this might be realtors, right? We have a number of realtor parents and they just plug along throughout the year and they pay a minimal amount each month that's comfortable for them and comfortable for us. And then boom, they sell a house and all of a sudden we get a big check that we weren't even expecting and they pay down a whole bunch of their tuition. And then they go back and they make their monthly payment and they make their monthly payment and then they sell another house and then they send us another big check. So we're happy to work with you on whatever makes sense. So if you've got a payment plan that works for you, you let us know. Our only requirement is that all tuition has to be paid within the school year. So whatever your payment plan is, it means that by the end of May of that school year, you have paid all your tuition and you can front load it, back load it, and break it up in whatever way that makes sense to you. Or as most of our families do, join one of the 4 payment plans, 2, 4, 10, or 12 months. Then let's also talk about deposits because deposits actually impact your payment plan. So you have your cost of tuition. The standard deposit here is 10%. You take off the 10%, you take the 90% that's left over, and you split it over your payment plan. Now, for some families, they might have a monthly budget that they're thinking about. This is how much we're comfortable with paying in tuition every year. This fits within our cash flow each month, and we feel like this is something that we can live with. And you put down the 10% and then you divide it up by your payment plan and you realize, geez, you're gonna have to pay more each month than you were necessarily feeling comfortable with. We can adjust that deposit for you. If you want to give us more money, we're good with that. So if you've got, a relative, a beloved aunt or grandparents that want to help out, they're not going to pay tuition, but they'd like to help out, they can make a bigger deposit. So we could put down more than 10%. Maybe you want to take a little bit out of a 529 account, or you want to take some out of your family savings. Again, we can apply more money to the deposit. That makes the balance due smaller. And then you divide it by the monthly payments that you're comfortable with. And then hopefully we can get that monthly payment into a range that fits within your budget and make sure family feel good about a saint's education. The other kind of example that would be, as I mentioned earlier, these decisions are made in March. For some of our families by March, they either have or they know what their tax refund's going to be if they're going to get one. So some families are like, hey, that's money I wasn't expecting. I'm going to throw that into the deposit. And therefore make my monthly payment smaller. So we will work with you on the deposit amount so that we can get the monthly payment amount down to a number that's comfortable to you. As I mentioned earlier, we can also give you an estimate of expenses. So if you want to, we could take the tuition that's due, add an estimate of the expenses that you might have over the year, the extra expenses, and then divide that into the monthly payment plans. And if we overestimate, then that just means on the last month or two of the year, you either don't have to make a payment or you have to make a smaller payment than we were planning on because the expenses didn't end up being as much as you want them to. So we can roll that into it. We want to make sure that we're not putting families into stress over their payments. We want to work with you to make sure that that's going to be comfortable for you. Okay, last part of this section, just some financial considerations for you to be thinking about. And I know that based on the registration, we have families that are thinking about being with 14 years, who have 3-year-olds who are looking at our Early Saints program. And I know we also have families that are going to be with us for just 4 years. They're just looking at us for the high school program. But if you're a family with a younger potential saint, you want to be thinking, do some long-term thinking, long-term career plans. What are you thinking in terms of career for one parent or both parents? Maybe one parent has stayed home while you had young children, but you're thinking about going back to work. What does that do in terms of income and being able to pay for tuition? So we encourage you to think about kind of career plans and what that means. Long-term family plans. As I said at the start of this, when it comes to financial assistance, you may be perfectly comfortable paying tuition for one child, but you've got another little one at home, or you're thinking of having another little one at home. And so, suddenly paying two tuitions, that might be a bit of a stretch for you. And so you might want to be thinking about financial assistance when your second one comes along. So as you think about the financial considerations, be thinking about also just your own family plans and your own family planning. Also, you want to be savvy about what's in the tax law. And I have to do my caveat to remind you that I'm just a school admission guy, and I am not a tax professional or financial professional. So you need to check with your tax and financial people and double check what I'm telling you. But let me give you 2 examples that are very real for us right now. So under the current tax plan, under the current administration, for the first time ever, 529 funds are available to pay for independent schools. Those previously had been exclusively used to pay for college. That is relatively new for us in the last few years. On the flip side of that, under the current administration's tax plan, it became highly restrictive what you can use home equity line and second mortgage funds for. Previously, families would use that. They would take out a line of credit on their house or a second mortgage to pay tuition because the mortgage interest was deductible and it was a much smaller interest rate than you might get doing something else. That is no longer the case. You cannot take out a second mortgage and use those funds to pay for tuition. Obviously, we have a change of administration. So going forward in the next few years, we're going to need to see what, if any, changes there are to the tax plans, but keep an eye on that. Also be thinking about, I talked earlier about kind of long-term career and long-term family. If you're, again, thinking about us with a young student, thinking about also looking at just long-term tuition, where you can expect that tuition. I want to go this way for you guys to see it, right? Where that tuition is going to go for you over the years. As I said before, usually around 3% or so is an annual increase. but there is a bit of a jump from the lower school to the middle school, and there's another jump from the middle school to the upper school, and that's very typical of independent schools. So when you go from lower to middle, it might be a 3% jump and then also a 3% tuition increase. So you could conceivably see a 6% change in 1 year. So you just want to kind of be mapping that out as you're thinking about that. And then thinking about what's included. What do you have to pay for, what you don't have to pay for? As I spelled out earlier, most everything that's mandatory for us is included, with some exceptions. Lots of things that are optional are not included, like lunch, like transportation, some of our international trips, et cetera. So you just want to be thinking about what's included in a tuition and what's not. And if you have a young child and you're thinking, 14 years, 12 years, this is not realistic for us, or not, just kind of not where our priorities are, then just thinking about, as parents, where do you stand in terms of your child's education? If you're going to make choices, some parents would say you want to make it in the early years, right? Those are the foundational years. That's when they're learning to read and learning to do math, and that's where the joy of learning is being developed. Other parents are like, hey, I live near a great public elementary school, and that's why we pay these taxes and live in this house, and we're going to hold off on St. Stephen, St. Agnes until high school, because we want to make sure they get the most rigorous academic program available to get them into the best college possible for them. Those are your family choices. No judgment on our side at all. That's for you to decide, but just something for you to think about. If you see 14 years as being a challenge for your family, then just think about kind of where your priorities are around education, and at what point it makes sense for you to jump into a Saints education. So at this point, and I see I'm running 2 minutes ahead of schedule, which is great, we're going to stop for a little Q&A, and I'm going to ask Mr. McLeod if he can check the Q&A box, and I invite you to throw your questions in there on any of those topics. Also, you'll see here my email, so if you want to follow up with a direct email to me this evening or in the coming days, feel free to do that. But Mr. McLeod, any questions we want to pause and attack right now?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome again. I'm looking in the Q&A, and it looks like we just have one or two that came in. The first question is, aftercare costs, please, and any flexibility in different days and times. I think that might be doesn't sound like a financial aid, financial assistance question. So I'll look with to the next question.
I wonder, Mr. McLeod, that question to me sounds like it might be from someone with a younger student who maybe is used to like half-day programs. Okay. Or something like that. But if I'm understanding that question correctly, our program for all students, all grades, even the early Saints at age 3, is a full-day program. So we've only got one program. It's all day, 5 days a week.
Excellent.
Do you think I'm answering their question correctly?
I think you did. That's
okay. If we didn't, email us, please.
Okay. And then the next question is, what is the school's relationship with military families?
Formally, we don't have a relationship with military families. That said, the school has a long history of military service. We're incredibly proud. Mr. McLeod, correct me if I'm wrong, anywhere between 6 and a dozen seniors each year off to service academies and similar programs like that.
That is correct.
We had a huge, amazing alumni speaker yesterday for Veterans Day. He had us on the edge of our seat for the first half, and then he had us all in tears for the second half of his remarks. We're a school that values military service, and as an admission office, we're very used to people coming and going, suddenly finding themselves stationed in Washington, D.C. in the middle of the school year. And we work hard to figure out if we can, find a place for a student who wants to come in January or something like that. And we also understand, although you've signed an enrollment contract, if you are stationed somewhere else and you provide those papers, we will let you out of your enrollment contract, and you don't need to pay the tuition for the rest of the year if you're a military family. So we have great appreciation of our families in military and our alumni in military service. But to technically answer the question, we don't have any formal relationship with any branches of the military.
Okay, and our next question is a question about technology.
Oh
Uh,
boy.
do families have to pay for computers and or iPads?
Mr. McLeod, I'm going to let you answer that one.
With the computers, I myself have a fifth grader who's been here since kindergarten, and we have not paid for the iPad that she uses. And then the same thing for the computer that she uses, the laptop that she uses. The fifth graders are allowed to bring laptops home, especially now when we started the year with distance learning. They were provided those laptops, and those were provided at no cost. In the middle school is the same. We use Macs at the middle school. So those students are given those students on loan for the entire year. They can take them to and from school. But when we get to the high school level, those students, we are on, I guess our program is called BYOD, bring your own device. So all students bring their own device. It could be Mac, it could be PC, laptop that they bring to and from school. There are opportunities and options for students to be able to purchase through purchase a laptop through our school, and students and families are made aware of that once they are enrolled. So that was that question. Let's see. I'm gonna squeeze. Um, Next question would be, can you provide a simple estimate for the cost of transportation and lunch per year?
Uh, Mr. McLeod, correct me if I'm wrong, but lunch is based on your grade. So there's a bit of a range there that they should be able to find on the website. And then tuition is roughly around $2,000 a year,
For-
which includes both morning and afternoon,
And that's
correct?
for the cost of transportation. That
For
is
the cost,
correct.
yeah, for the cost of transportation.
A-
So there's one run in the morning and then there's two runs in the afternoon. We also provide at no cost free shuttle service to Braddock and King Street metros. So students who ride the metro to get here, we will pick them up at those two stations and bring them to school. We also have an inter-campus shuttle that's free of charge. So your child may go to the upper school, but if you live near the lower school, or maybe your office is near the lower school, or you drive by the lower school on your way to the office, you can drop your kid off at the lower school and we will get them over to the upper school for you.
Right. I'll share this question. I'll pose this question, then I'll also answer this one. And this one is the easy one related to lunch. It said the question is, can I bring my lunch to eliminate the cost of lunch? Now that our students are in in-person learning and some distance learning, everyone brings lunch. So everyone brings their lunch, but I guess in a regular environment, non-COVID environment, students can bring their lunch, or they can purchase the plan where they can go in and they can get lunch every single day, or it can be a more of a pay as you go. So if every Friday you allow your student to get lunch from the dining hall, they all have a lunch pin, whether they are a part of the lunch program or not. They all have a pin, and they can purchase their lunch, and then those individual lunches that they do purchase will be added to their bill. So that's how that goes. Next question would be in terms of textbooks. Are textbooks included in the tuition? Dr. Well, if you want, I can take this one as well.
Sure.
Um, so the answer to that is, in the upper school is going to be the first time when the students actually have to purchase those books. In middle school, they do purchase many of the books, but some of them have been moved to digital books and handouts. So the actual textbooks that we do use, over the years, it has been reduced, but most of the students will be provided a textbook that they can use in class. So we do have some classroom copies of some math books and some history books. But once they get to high school, many of the books that they do purchase are going to have to be purchased by the family. And if I can just give an estimate, as we all know, if you have any students in college or high school, that sometimes books can be expensive. So they can vary anywhere from, I would say, from $200 all the way up to maybe like $800 for all the books if you're taking some AP classes and some more advanced level classes.
I see some of the upcoming questions we have are about financial assistance. So I think we'll move on to that section of the evening because I can see from some of the questions that I'm going to be answering them for you. If you had a question we didn't get to, we will get back to you. It looks like almost everybody named themselves, so that's good. If you named yourself and we didn't answer your question, we will get back to you. If you forgot to name yourself, go ahead and ask your question anyway, even though we're going to skip past it right now. But get it into our list here, and then someone will be able to get back to you in the next day or two. But we're going to move on now to the Saints Financial Assistance Program. And again, if this is something that you don't ever foresee yourself having an interest in, feel free to drop off and go on with your evening. And then for everyone else, we're gonna move on to that. So let's take a look at the agenda for the financial assistance portion of the evening that's coming up right now. All right, stay or go. A little Clash music. That song's gonna be stuck in everyone's head now for the rest of the night. So here's our agenda for the next 20 minutes or so. We're going to talk about some terminology because it's very important that we're all on the same page with terminology. And it's a little tricky here in the Washington, D.C. area. And then I'll run you through our philosophy here at St. Stephen St. Agnes around financial assistance. We'll talk about qualifying. I'll walk you through the application process, what happens after your initial year that you're with us. And then again, we'll open it up to Q&A. As I said earlier, we strongly encourage anyone who's even thinking about it to apply. You want to know what the worst case scenario is? It's the tuition I already showed you. That's you can apply and we're not going to charge you more. So you already know what the worst case scenario is, which is no financial assistance. And you know what that tuition is. So there's no harm in applying. And again, you might not qualify now because you only have one student with us, or you're starting at a younger grade when the tuition's lower than the older grades, but it's good to get a sense of when you might then qualify going forward from there. I also want to say just two other things. I know with financial assistance, this is a very personal conversation. And I want you to know that we honor that. We honor that it's sometimes an uncomfortable conversation when parents have to share their financial data with us, or maybe some circumstances that are going on at home, sometimes their kid doesn't even know about. And just know that we are here to do this in confidence and partnership and sensitivity with you. We know that this is not always an easy thing to do, to kind of open up your checkbook to some strangers and talk about what you need to be able to have your child join us. So we want you to know that we honor that, and we're honored by the fact that you're willing to have that conversation with us. I also want you to know that this has nothing to do with admissions decisions and has nothing to do with the admission process. In fact, the admission directors who you are working with right now, or will be working with this winter to get you through the admission process, they don't even know if you've applied for financial assistance. The only thing that they can see is there's a box on the application where you say you might be interested in it. They can see if you've checked that box. They can't see anything else. Nobody on the admission committee will know anything about your financial assistance application. And as we'll talk about here in a couple minutes, our financial assistance doesn't have anything to do with what we think about you or your child or your family. So nobody on the financial assistance committee knows anything about your admission application. Nobody on the admission committee or in the admission office knows anything about your financial assistance application. The only two people who have access to both those records are right here on this Zoom with you. Mr. McLeod and myself are the only two people who are going to know that you've applied for admission and you've applied for financial assistance. So I hope throughout the course of the evening, we have gotten to a place where you can believe that you will trust us when we tell you that these two things are very separate processes for us. Okay, terminology, so important because it is very complicated here in the Washington, D.C. area. And I'm going to try to keep this short. DC has two kinds of schools. There are independent schools and there are private schools. And the private schools are typically Catholic schools. So independent schools, that would be us, Potomac, Sidwell, St. Albans, Madeira. Kind of think about that group of schools, if you will. Private schools, that would include Gonzaga, Bishop O'Connell, Bishop Ireton, right? So think about those schools, which are kind of Catholic schools. Independent schools offer financial assistance. Private schools offer financial assistance, but they also offer scholarship. Independent schools do not offer scholarship. And this is where it can get confusing for family, particularly if you're applying to one of each, right? If you're looking at Gonzaga and you're looking at St. Stephen, St. Agnes, it can get very confusing because you're looking at two totally different kinds of schools with two totally different programs. So what's the difference? Financial assistance, this is what you can afford. It's financial. It's a financial decision. You will provide us your financial information and we'll go through that. And there will be an assessment of what you can afford. And if you cannot afford the full tuition, then we will figure out some way to close that gap so that your son or daughter can be with us. It's that straightforward. It is based on how much money you need to be able to have your child join our community. Scholarship, on the other hand, is all about what your child has to offer the school. So a private school might have a musical scholarship. They might have an athletic scholarship. They might have an academic scholarship. Some schools have alumni scholarships. You can get, $2,000 off your tuition simply because one of your parents went to the same school. That has nothing to do with your finances. You could make $5 million a year and still get a scholarship from a private school if that's what they want to do. So they use their money to recruit students, right? Based on where they spend their money is where they're telling you what's important to them. So if they're giving you an academic scholarship, they think your student has a lot of academic potential and they're willing to put some money behind that. So it's a recruitment tool for them. So as we go forward for the rest of this evening, we're going to be talking about financial assistance because that's what independent schools like St. Stephen's and St. Agnes offer. This is need-based and the decisions are based in the financial data that you provide to us. All right, so let's take a little bit a look at the philosophy here. So the purpose of the financial assistance program at St. Stephen's St. Agnes is to provide a saints education for a student whose family could not otherwise afford it. It's that straightforward. We use our money to enroll the best kids we can have, that we want to have here, that we think can contribute here and thrive here, and we think we can serve them well. And their families paying all the tuition is just not something that's possible for them. So as I said earlier, we have $5.7 million this year. Most of it is from our donors. And when we talk to our donors, we're saying to them, we're asking for your help so that we can help families who have great kids have those kids come to us. So that's what our program is all about. So some philosophy or some assumption. So we're assuming that if you're looking at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes, the tuition here is a priority for your family and that you are thinking of your family as the primary source. Now, your family might also include lovely, generous grandparents or other family members or godparents who want to help out. But you're applying to St. Stephen and St. Agnes saying, we want this for our child and we're willing to make it a priority in our financial planning and how we allocate our resources. And that our family is all behind on that. And we see ourselves as the primary payers of the tuition. And then we'll look to the school to supplement it as we might need to. To that end, we're assuming that both parents are working. If you need financial assistance, unless you have an elder relative living at home with you that you have to look after and you've taken in, or if you have children under the age of 5, the assumption is that both parents will be working to pay towards tuition. We will look at voluntary changes in status, those that could pay for your financial assistance. So if you have your child here and one parent decides they want to quit their career and start a business or do charitable work, that's great, but the financial assistance program doesn't exist to supplement that choice. If a family decides or a parent decides to make a career change, our assumption is that you are thinking about the impact that'll have on tuition and having your children enrolled at the school when you're making those decisions. Excuse me. All parents are involved in the child's life are part of the financial assistance program. So if parents have never been married or are no longer married, but both parents are in the picture and both parents are active, both parents are expected and need to be part of the financial assistance program. So you're asking, what does that look like? So questions you might ask yourself, are you claiming the child on your taxes? That means you're actively involved in the child's life and telling the government that you're actively involved in the child's life. That means you need to be involved in the financial assistance program. Another question to ask is that parent that you're questioning, are they involved in the life of the school? Do they get invited to parent-teacher conferences? Do they know when your child is going to be in the play? Do they get emails about snow days? Do they get emails with the report cards in them? If a parent is that involved in the school, then the expectation is that parent's also going to be involved in the financial assistance program. As I mentioned earlier at the start of this, our funding is regardless of the student. So again, it's all based on finances. When we make the decision initially, it has nothing to do with admissions. And we'll talk a little bit later on, but when we make our decision in subsequent years, it doesn't matter if your child is or is not on the honor roll, whether your child is or is not on a sport team or whatever. It's a purely financial decision for us, separate from the family and separate from the child. We also expect that all institutions that your family's involved in will participate in financial assistance. So it's not an option to say, hey, we need financial assistance because we're saving this money to pay for our older child's college education. You need to apply to that college for financial assistance as well. We're not providing financial assistance so that you can then provide money to the college. So we expect that if a family is paying multiple tuitions, that all the institutions to where they're paying tuition are part of the process. And then finally, I want to say, as I said a little while ago about admissions, this to us is a partnership. We want to work with you. As I said earlier, when we were talking about payment plans, we don't want our families to be in financial stress. We don't want this to be a school versus home relationship. We want this to be a partnership. And that's why I said earlier, we acknowledge that partnership, it can be an intimate one, right? We can sometimes have to have really, can be uncomfortable conversations and things you're sharing with us that are awkward. And I promise you that we will work really hard to not make it awkward. But we want to be partners with you in this. But we expect, as I said, our first and primary expectation is that if you're going down this road for an independent school education, for a Saints education, that you're prioritizing paying tuition as you're thinking about your family's resources and how you allocate money. So what are the big levers, if you will? What are the big things that impact a financial assistance decision? So here they are, but I want to give you two scenarios because it's complicated. It's not easy. I'll be straightforward with you on that. A family that makes $500,000, has 3 students enrolled with us, and has a grandparent living in the house full time, they're probably going to receive financial assistance unless they have large assets somewhere. $500,000 does not get a family of 5 very far with an elder relative living and 3 tuitions to pay. On the other hand, if a family is making $500,000 and they only have 1 child, and maybe it's the younger child, and they don't have any other extraneous expenses, that family isn't going to receive financial assistance. So you can't just say, hey, if I make X, do I get it? Or if I make X, how much do I get? It's a much more complicated process than that. We look at families' income and assets. We look at families' reasonable liabilities and expenses. So let me explain that to you and maybe give you a couple examples that'll help you understand what we're talking about. So the way it works is that we set a formula and we make certain assumptions. So for example, we make an assumption that a family of 4 living in the Northern Virginia area has $4,000 in non-housing expenses each month. So there's a whole housing allowance that's set aside, but $4,000 in groceries and utilities and haircuts and dry cleaning and gasoline for the car and all those things. We make that as that's $4,000. Nationally, that number is $2,500. But for us, we think a reasonable expense for a family of 4 in Northern Virginia is actually $4,000 a month in expenses. So we set that aside. Another example, most independent schools or many independent schools do not allow families to give to charity. If you can afford to give to charity, then you can afford to pay tuition. That's the perspective, if you will. As an Episcopal school, we want to encourage families to give to charity. We believe in philanthropic giving. It's part of who we're called to be. But we do put a cap on that. So for us, we'll allow $5,000 in charitable giving before we start to ask you to pay more in tuition. So the first $5,000 of charitable giving, that's a write-off. We want you to be able to support organizations that you want to be able to support. So reasonable liabilities and expenses. If you're a family applying for financial assistance, you shouldn't be driving a $100,000 car. That's not a reasonable expense for someone who's applying for financial assistance. And we're happy to walk through those with you. You can always give us a call. The biggest factor, this is the big one, is how many children are in tuition charging institutions. So as I've said, I think once or twice already, you may not qualify for financial assistance with one child. You may very well qualify for financial assistance if you have two or three. So as you might bring more children into St. Stephen's St. Agnes, you may suddenly cross that threshold where they can afford one, they can't really afford two, and boy, they're going to need a bit more help to be able to afford to have three with us. So the number of kids that you have, now that includes St. Stephen's St. Agnes, that includes daycare programs that your youngest children might be at, that includes colleges where your older children might be at. So wherever you have a child that's charging tuition, that's the biggest driver on your qualification. And then the opposite happens. Let me tell you kind of what happens at the end. When that oldest child graduates college, suddenly you've gone from having to two to having one. You did qualify for financial assistance because you were paying college tuition. Now you're no longer paying college tuition. All of that money you had to pay towards education, that can go to the one child that's here with us at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. So it works the other way too, right? Add children into tuition and charging institutions and you qualify more. Graduate children out of tuition charging institutions and you're going to qualify less. So just something in the long term, if you have multiple kids to be thinking about as they start to fall off the other end of the educational system and graduate and go into the world, you're going to qualify less for financial assistance. And another factor is the age of the parents. The formula is very sophisticated and it has a sliding scale of assumption based on how old you are and how many more years you have of earning. So there's a very generous, it's not out of control generous, but there's a generous allocation for retirement. We know people need to be saving for retirement. We don't want you to pay years of St. Stephen's St. Agnes tuition and then find that you can't retire in a reasonable and comfortable way. So the process makes some assumptions around how much you should be saving for retirement based on your age. So the younger you are, the longer you have to save for retirement, that's going to impact your tuition and how much it costs. The closer you get to retirement, the more we think you need to be saving because you don't have many years left to save for retirement. That's also going to have an impact on it. So the age and the earning of parents. And then lastly, on the flip side of that coin, if you will, there's kind of your side and our side. Our side is the cost of tuition. So when we're looking at financial assistance, we're looking solely at the cost of tuition. What's it going to cost for you to pay the tuition here? As I said earlier, we do have some expenses, some of which are mandatory. And with mandatory expenses, we have a separate fund to help you out with that. It's the Diane Dunning Fund. It's named for the person who is the director of admissions here for 31 years. And it's a separate fund to help families out with expenses. And basically the way it works is that we will cover a mandatory expense at the same rate in which we cover your tuition. So if you're receiving 50% off tuition and your child is going to go on a trip to Selma to study racial justice and equity issues, we will give you a grant for 50% off the cost of the trip to go to Selma. So we have that separate fund. And then we also have another fund, which is just called the Job Loss Fund. So this is for a family that either is receiving little or no financial assistance. A parent has lost their job. We need to bridge them temporarily while there's no income. But the expectation is the parent will then get a job and they'll no longer need our assistance. So there's a whole other fund that is just for temporary help. And then this year, knock on wood, let's hope we don't need it next year, but this year we also have a COVID relief fund. So families who have been temporarily financially impacted by COVID have been able to apply for some additional assistance to get us through this year. But hopefully we'll all be back to work in a more normal life by the 21-22 school year, and we won't have to worry about the COVID process anymore. So now you kind of understand how we approach it. You know what the big triggers are in terms of decision making. Let's actually walk through real quickly, because it is a rather quick process. Let's walk through the application process for financial assistance. TADS application, you're going to complete a TADS application. TADS is an outside company that we contract with to do this process for us. There's a couple of them in the country. This is the one we use. These companies are professional organizations. They are much smarter than anyone at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes on reading tax forms and understanding Schedule E and rental properties, and if you run your own business and all those good things. So I honestly, in all my years of doing this, I don't know a school that runs their own financial assistance program. Everyone contracts out to one of the the big three companies. They're also objective. They will never meet you. They will never meet your child. They are just working through the numbers and applying the formula as we've asked them to do so. As I said before, we believe in $4,000 a month in expenses for Northern Virginia is realistic. So we tell them, get rid of the $2,500, put the $4,000 in there. We tell them, go ahead and allow for $5,000 of charitable giving. So we tell them what our priorities and our structure is around our formula, and then they run it, they do the analysis. Again, they are entirely objective, kind of unknown entity out there. And then they give us the answer that we're looking for after they've done the whole analysis. So what's completing a TAS application? It's an actual application. And it's basically kind of doing taxes, right? It's kind of putting money into different lines and it creates different formulas for you. If you have your basic financial records, it doesn't take very long to actually do the whole thing, to go through the application. It's all done online. You'll go on, you'll create an account and what have you. You'll be asked to upload your most recent pay stub when you're doing the TADS application. And then you're going to use your previous year's taxes. So when you file in this coming winter, your application is February 1st. So when you're doing this in January or February, don't worry, you haven't done your 2020 taxes. We actually don't want your 2020 taxes. We want your 29 taxes. So you're going to upload your 2019 taxes up into the system for us. So those are the big things that go into it. So the application, your pay stub, and your taxes, that's where you start. And then TADS will do an analysis of that, and then they'll come back to you if they need additional information. And often that is the case if you own your own business or you are just your own employer, right? If you're a standalone lawyer or dentist or whatever the case is, they're going to come back to you and want to ask you to upload business taxes and things like that. There is a place in the process, there's a text box where you can just type a message and let us know what's going on. So if there is something that you think we need to know and it is not translating into one of their boxes that they have, you can type a whole message and they will consider that when they're looking at it. They will also send us the message. So they will give us the analysis, but they'll also give us the message. So what kind of messages might go in there? Maybe you're a realtor, right? We're back to realtors as we were talking about the front end of the webinar. And we asked you to give us your 2019 taxes and you made good money in 2019, but you didn't make the same amount in 2020. And we need to know that. You don't have as much money as you had in 2019. There's nowhere in any of the boxes to be able to do that. So you want to be able to tell us, in 2020, I actually made $40,000 less than I made in 2019, but you only have the 2019 taxes, so you can't see that. So that's the type of thing you might want to put in the text box. Unfortunately, last year we had a situation with the family that had a flood in their house, and they were able to just upload receipts and show tens of thousands of dollars and expenses that they had. That's not going to show up in their taxes. There's not a box for that. So use that text window when you're filling out the application to tell us anything you want us to know as we are considering your application. And then budget, we may come back to you and ask you to reconcile a monthly budget for us. So here's your income each month, and here's how that income is allocated throughout the month so that we can better understand the cash flow of your family. So we may come back to you later and ask you to do that for us. And then the last part of the application process is that we will send out your financial assistance grant at the time of your offer of admission. So it literally is one email right after the other. They go about 5 minutes apart from each other. So that first Friday in March, you get an email that says, hey, Scott's in. We're so excited to offer him admission. We really hope he's going to join us here and become a saint. And then 5 minutes later, you're going to get an email. It's like, hey, here's the tuition. Here's the financial assistance we've calculated for you. This is what you actually owe. And then if you remember at the beginning, we're going to take 10% of that you owe, and that's your deposit. And that's what it takes to enroll little Scott, is to give us that 10% of what you owe after the financial assistance has come off of there. So that's the application process. For most families, it's honestly pretty straightforward. Just do those 3 parts, and we'll get back to you if we have any questions, but generally we don't have too many questions. And then what happens in subsequent years? That's a big question, or should be a big question you should be asking. So let me tell you about subsequent years after you've gotten financial assistance for 1 year. First thing to know, you are our priority. If your child is a saint, if your family is part of our saints family, you are our priority. So I said a minute ago, for you guys, your application deadline is February 1st. For our current families who are with us now in this school year, their application deadline was back on November 1st. And that's because we want to make sure we take care of our current families first before we think about allocating any other money. So I tell you that it could be discouraging, right? You're thinking, oh my gosh, they're giving away all the money and I haven't even applied yet. Don't worry, we have plenty of money. But I tell you that because I don't want you to think, okay, we can make this happen, but what if it goes haywire in the future? It should not go haywire in the future, honestly. And I'll walk you through that a little bit because you're our priority. We will never run out of money for our current families. They are the ones who are going to get the funds first. And then we take what's left and then we work that through the admissions process for the people who apply in February. You will, however, every year need to file an annual application. So this is a process that you go through every year. And we'll send you a reminder and let you know about your November 1st deadline. And your financial assistance, it is going to change as you change. And honestly, for many of our families, they don't change that much. They've got, steady job and steady income and, they get an annual raise, 2, 3, 4, 5%, whatever it is. And it doesn't change that much over the years. And in a minute, I'll show you what that looks like. But for other families, let's think a minute ago, I was talking about the realtor, maybe that does go up, right? The income does go up dramatically sometimes, depending on what the market's doing and what mortgage rates look like, et cetera. So the financial assistance is going to go up and down. If you're having a great year, we're going to pull back on the financial assistance. If you have a bad year, we're going to be there for you. We're going to figure out how to close that gap for you. We want to work with you. So we will go with wherever your financial situation is going. Except, as I mentioned earlier, that change in careers. So if you make a voluntary, right? So this isn't a job loss or a furlough, which we saw 2 years ago with the US government. But if you're making a voluntary change in your financial situation, that has a negative cash flow, the school is not necessarily going to step up and support that. So if a parent decides that they don't want to work anymore, or they do want to spend a year doing something charitable and wonderful, we're not necessarily going to step up and support that. So we encourage families, as I said at the very beginning of this, to be thinking long-term. What is your long-term career plan? And how that might impact your ability to afford an independent school education. And then as I put at the bottom there, our goal is no surprises. If we're doing our job right, you shouldn't be surprised with your financial assistance grant and how much you have to pay every year. Because if we are doing our job right, we have been in communication with you throughout. If we see things that don't make sense to us, we have called you or emailed you or sent you additional paperwork we need from you. Our goal is to make sure there are no surprises. As I've said more than once this evening, we do not want to create financial stress for you. And there's nothing more stressful than a financial surprise. And so that is not what we want to do. We want to work in partnership with you and have open, ongoing communication with you around your financial assistance profile and what you might be qualifying for in each year. So as I said, for most of our families, it's pretty steady Eddie. Sorry, it's this way for you guys looking at me. It's pretty steady and it doesn't change dramatically from year to year. So let's take a look. So we graphed this out for you just to give you an idea. Oh, good. I think you can see my cursor. So see here, so this is grade scale. So let's assume that you're going to be with us for 12 years. Here's the cost of tuition, right? It goes up a bit, it goes up a bit, it goes up a bit, it goes up a bit. Every year it goes up, as I said earlier, 3.25%, something like that. Here's your line. So here's what you're paying. So see here, these kind of all go up. You're going to be poor every year, right? I mean, you're not going to pay the same amount for 12th grade that you pay for kindergarten, but how much more you have to pay every year is going to be proportional to those two lines, right? So if this goes up 3%, your part's probably going to go up 3%. Now, as I said very early in the first half of the webinar, there are two jumps. So here's middle school, right? So I said in 1 year, you might see like a 6% jump because that's the jump from lower school to middle school. So that's the 3% jump plus the 3% tuition increase that all happens in 1 year on you. So that's where that jump is. But then see that levels out and it's more or less in line with that again. And then there's the jump to upper school, right? There's another 6% jump there. You've moved from 8th grade, you're now up to 9th grade there. And then you see that trajectory there and you see that trajectory there. So over your time, this is a 13-year chart. This doesn't include junior kindergarten, which would be 14 years, because our financial assistance program starts in kindergarten. You can see that it's just going to go up proportionally with tuition. And again, that's because we don't want there to be any surprises for you. So you're going to be our priority. We're going to work with you. As your life changes, we will change with you. And as you can see on this chart, if your life doesn't change dramatically over your 13 years with us, your financial assistance is going to be very predictable and consistent for you so that you can do your financial planning. And I've overtalked. We're at 7:57, but I'm going to do Q&A, Mr. McLeod. If people want to hang on for a bit, I'll stay on. I trust you'll stay on, sir. And let's see what we can do to be helpful. And if we do at some point tap out, or if your question is too specific and really wouldn't apply to everybody here in the audience, then we'll follow up with you with an email here in the next coming days. So Mr. McLeod, over to you, sir.
Okay, there was a question that did come in. It said, after the first year, will you also have to pay the 10% deposit every year?
Yes. So as I said, your deadline is November 1st. The re-enrollment contracts go out at the end of January, and they are due back 2 weeks later, around the 15th of February, and you pay the 10% deposit. That's what holds your child's spot. So your first tuition payment as a family that's returning to us isn't actually due till July. So all you do is put down the 10% in February, and then you don't have to worry about paying tuition until July, because you're probably still paying the current year's tuition on the payment plan. And remember, I may have gone by it kind of quickly in the middle of one of the slides. It's 10% of what you owe, right? So right now, everyone here is thinking about financial assistance. So everyone here is probably thinking, I'm not paying that full tuition. So don't look at the tuition slide that I gave you earlier and think, oh my gosh, I have to come up with 10% of that. It's 10% of what you owe. So if after your financial assistance, you're only paying $18,000 to have your child go here, then your deposit is going to be 10% of that. So it's going to be $1,800 instead of 10% of the full tuition.
Next question, will we need to provide the 2020 tax return as a part of our application for assistance, or will it only be the 2019 tax return?
For this year, it would be the 2019, and then when you apply for, goodness, Mr. McLeod, what's that going to be? The 21-22 school year. When you apply for the 21-22 school year in November of 21, you'll provide the 2020 year taxes. The only exception to that would be is if you want us to have the 2020 taxes because they're dramatically different, right? Think of that realtor again. They made a lot of money in 19. They didn't make as much money in 20. You're going to want to voluntarily give us the 2020 tax form so that we can see that your tuition or your income is less than it was. But we do this so that you don't have people who file extensions, who own their own business, who don't file till July. It gets rid of all of that by us just asking for the 2019 taxes instead.
Another great question. What percentage of families receive financial aid, and what is the average amount of aid for each family?
About 30% of our students receive some level of financial assistance. The overall average is about $24,000, but that's a little skewed because the tuitions are different, right? So that's the average across all 14 grades that we have here. So the average in lower school is probably going to be, what would you say, Mr. McLeod? Probably more like 12 or 15. Middle school is probably going to be more like 18, 20, and then upper school is going to be 24, as I said, because that reflects that the upper school tuition is so much more than the lower school tuition. And I just also want to remind you, I'm looking at the questions, and there's a lot of anonymous questions, which is fine. But if you want us to get back to you, just need to make sure that you've named yourself so that when the question comes through, we can see who it's coming from. And if you've accidentally submitted an anonymous question, feel free to name yourself and then send your question again, and we'll get back to you on email. All right, Mr. McLeod.
I'll just, there are two similar questions, but the second part to that question, is there a benefit to applying before the deadline?
No, because we don't make any of our decisions until it's time to sign up. What happens is the admissions committees meet in February and make their admissions decisions towards the end of February. And then they transfer over that list to the financial assistance committee. And then it makes its decisions in early March before you get your decision on that first Friday. So the Financial Assistance Committee doesn't even know that you exist, honestly, until the admission committee is giving your child a green light and said, yeah, we'd love to have this kid in our community next year. What can you guys do? So that committee doesn't even start to work until the end of February. So there's no benefit in applying early. It's just going to sit there in the queue. I mean, we'll love you for doing it. It gives us comfort to know that your application's done and all the boxes have been checked. If you think you're going to have a complicated application, again, particularly if you own a business or you have rental properties or something like that, I would encourage you to start early just so that you can see if TADS has needs. If you wait to the last minute and then they need a whole bunch of other information from you, that may delay your application. So if you start early, you can at least have confidence knowing that your application got completed on time.
Next question, is there a fee to apply for TADS?
Oh, Mr. McLeod, what is it? $45?
I think it is $45. So it is an application fee
Yep.
of last I checked, I remember it being $45, correct?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay.
There's also, and Mr. McLeod, I think it's also $45, so maybe I'm confusing it. You will pay all your tuition through our online portal through a portal called Smart Tuition, and that has a fee to set up your account for the first time. And that's, Mr. McLeod, do you know, can you correct me? Is that 45, 75 maybe?
Yeah, it's just I think it's somewhere around 45.
Yeah, I think that's just a coincidence that they're both 45. But there is a fee to set up your online account for the first time for paying tuition.
Let's see. This was a shuttle question, and I can answer this one. Is the shuttle available both ways? Because my kid is at the upper school, I used to travel to the lower school. Yes. So the shuttle, it travels through in between all campus, the inter-campus shuttle. It does go to all of the campuses. So that makes sense that if you want to pick up more than one child from different divisions at one location, as long as a student knows, okay, my mom or my dad or whoever's going to pick me up at the lower school and I'm at the middle school, I take the shuttle bus that goes to the lower school, and then we can all get picked up and go home from there. So that makes sense. What are the expected extra expenses on average for upper school? Dr. Well, I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, but the extra expenses are going to be related to maybe playing on a sports team. So if there's sports team and there's uniform or gear related to that sport, then that would be an extra expense. Some of the trips that our students take, and our students at the upper school, they take different trips. They take international trips that will be for service. There's some that are just for cultural experience, and depending on where they go and how far they're going, there will be some costs affiliated with that, whether it's going to be plane tickets, hotel, lodging, like that sort of thing. So those are just examples of the extra expenses that you can expect to incur at the upper school. And then a similar question, what are the extra fees for the lower school besides the extended day program? As a parent that has been here, with a daughter here since kindergarten, that's now in 5th grade, pretty much those are the big ones. So the tuition that we pay, and then the extended day. My daughter takes the shuttle bus. She does take the shuttle bus, and the inter-campus shuttle, there's no charge for any students for that, but it's the charges do come when you want to be picked up from your home or near your home, or be dropped off at home or near your home. So hopefully that answers that question. This is another question. I believe it relates to the application through TADS for financial assistance. So do you have to apply every year?
Yes. So every year you'll fill that out, and every year you'll upload your pay stub and the past year's taxes. So yeah, that's an annual process. Again, as your life moves, we'll move with you. So we need to apply annually so we can figure out, do you need some more assistance this year for some reason? Maybe you have a second child joining us, Or, hey, the McLeods won the lottery. They don't need any assistance. So we're going to move in both directions with you. So you do need to apply annually so we can have that analysis done by TADS.
Okay. I think we've made our way through many of the questions here. A lot of these look like they can be answered offline, and because they look very, very specific. I'll ask just one more question here. If we are contributing to a 529 plan for our child's college education, are we expected to use it towards tuition at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes?
Specifically, no, not at this time. Because the 529 law is so new, we know that when they were established, either by parents or grandparents or godparents, that the intention was that they would be for college. If in a couple of years, 529 plans are still eligible for independent school education, we may rethink that policy. That's St. Stephen's and St. Agnes. A lot of schools do expect you to spend 529 plans. So as that's a great question to ask each individual school, because there's not a blanket answer. But at this time and for the foreseeable future, we are not accessing those funds because we know that the law is so new that that was not the intention when you set it up. And as I said, the head of the webinar, that law may change, so that may become a moot point. But that's a great question to ask each individual school.
I've got another one here. Once TADS approves the application and offers financial assistance, does the school always agree with the TADS decision?
If everything we've been provided, if we have everything we need to know, then yes. But if there's something that we don't know that we need to know, then we would welcome opening that conversation with you. This is particularly for our returning families because they apply all the way back in November. Sometimes their financial situation changes after November 1st. And so we need to go back in and ask TADS to make some adjustments, if you will. But generally the assessment they provide, as I said earlier, they're the experts, they're the professionals, they're objective. We generally find that, that's their analysis is what we're counting on. There's a place in the TADS application where you put in, this is what we think we can afford or what we're willing to afford in our budget for tuition. And when TADS does its analysis, if those two numbers are way off from each other, they will typically get in touch with you and say, hey, this is what we're seeing and this is what you're saying. And they're not even close to each other. And just trying to understand where that difference is. It might have been in a data entry error on your part. You meant to put a comma in and you put a colon or a period in instead, and you changed $100,000 to $10,000. Or it may be that you just have other priorities. I mean, we're entirely judgment-free zone when it comes to this. It is your money and your children, and you do exactly what you want with them. But it's also our priorities, right? As I said, an example is earlier I said, unless you have an elder relative living with you or a child under 5, both parents are expected to work. That's our policy. If you as a family decide that one parent's not going to work and therefore you need more financial assistance, that's your choice. We're not judging that the other parent isn't working. We're just not funding that choice. We're not funding that lifestyle choice, if you will. So TADS will get in touch with you if what you feel like you can afford and what they feel like you can afford are way off base from each other.
I think similar or what goes along with this question is the next question. If you feel that TADS does not provide you with a favorable decision, is there an internal appeal process, or can you work with the admission office to address this?
Yeah, similar question and a similar answer. So if there's nothing we didn't know when the decision is made, the decision is not going to change. As I said earlier, we want to work in partnership with you, and partnership is being honest and open with each other. And this isn't buying a car. This isn't negotiations and we're gonna offer you this and you're gonna say this and we're gonna try to find something in the middle. That's not a partnership, and that's not the kind of relationship we want with our parents. So the only way to really appeal the decision is if you can provide us information that we didn't have when the initial decision was made. And that's often where you want to use that text box where I talked about earlier, right? If there's something financial going on in your life that we need to know about that you couldn't find a box to fit it into, that's when you want to make sure you put that into your text box. I'll give you an extreme example of that, just so that I can give you an example. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said that this can sometimes be a really intimate conversation. Sometimes families share with us that they're thinking about divorce and they want to know what that means. If they have two households and they have to pay two mortgages or two rents and they have to have two cars instead of one, how does that impact their ability to pay tuition? Sometimes we have that conversation. They haven't made a decision. They haven't talked to their child about it, but they want to share it with us because it's got an impact. But there's nowhere in the form to check off a box. Yes, we think we might get a divorce in the next year or two. So that's the type of information that could change our decision because it wasn't information that was in your application. But if everything in your application is accurate and complete, then we're relying on the analysis of TADS, and there's no point in appealing because the decision isn't going to change if the input information hasn't changed.
All right. Okay. Just scrolling through here. It looks like those are many of the questions that we have here, Dr. Weller.
Okay. Well, you have on the screen, families, you've got my email address right there. You've also got the email address for our Director of Financial Assistance. So feel free to reach out to either of us. We are able to, at the end of the Zoom, download the whole Q&A document. So we'll go through the Q&A document, make sure we answered all your questions. If we didn't answer your question and we have your name, if we can trace you back somehow and find an email that matches the name that you put in the Q&A, then we will email you here in the next couple of days with either an answer to your question or try to find a time to connect on the phone so that we can talk through whatever your concern is. But thank you so much for joining us. You will, in the coming days, find this webinar on our website along with our other recordings. So if you want to go back through, and I don't know why, but if you want to go back through and listen to it again, or if there's someone in your household who couldn't be part of this, who wants to be able to listen to it, you'll find it shortly on our website so that you can do so. And as I said at the very beginning of this, we'll do this again in March, right? Because in March, it's real. March, you've got to make a decision. In March, we know what the tuition is going to be for next year. And we'll do a very similar program like this in March where we can go through all the payment plans and all the future implications of financial assistance, et cetera. But on behalf of our Saints admissions team and Mr. McLeod and me, I want to thank you for joining us on this Thursday evening and fitting one more Zoom into your week. And thank you very much for your interest in the Saints education. We're here to work with you and to be partners. Let us know how we can do that. Have a great night, everyone.